What you are about to hear is based on a series of events that allegedly took place between November 2017 and March 2018 in a small unincorporated community in rural West Virginia known locally as Black Hollow. The family at the center of this story, the Maddox family, consisted of 4 members. Father Gerald Maddox, age 41, mother Corrine Maddox, age 38, their daughter Ellie, age 12, and their youngest, a boy named Thomas, age 7. Before November of 2017, the Maddox family was, by all accounts, ordinary. Gerald worked as a long-haul truck driver. Corrine was a part-time bookkeeper at a feed store in the nearest town, about 20 minutes south. The kids attended public school. They went to church on Sundays sometimes. They had a dog named Biscuit, a mutt with a brown patch over one eye. They were the kind of family you would drive past without a second glance. And that is exactly what makes everything that followed so difficult to understand, because the Maddox family did not go looking for what found them. They simply moved into the wrong house. The property at 14 Coulter Road had been on the market for 11 months when Gerald and Corrine first drove out to see it. The listing was unusual in its honesty. The real estate agent, a woman named Patricia Voss who had been selling homes in the Tri-County area for nearly 2 decades, later admitted in an interview that she had struggled to write the listing description. The house was a 2-story colonial-style farmhouse, built in 1931, sitting on just over 4 acres of land that backed up against dense, old-growth forest. There was a detached garage, a root cellar beneath the main house, and a small barn that had partially collapsed sometime in the early 2000s. The asking price was $47,000, which, even for that part of West Virginia, was staggeringly low. Patricia Voss said, and this is a direct quote from a local newspaper interview she gave in 2019, "I told them everything I was legally obligated to tell them. I told them the previous owner had died in the house. I told them there had been difficulty with the property before. I did not tell them what I personally felt when I walked through those rooms because that is not something you can put in a listing, but I felt it. Every time I unlocked that front door, I felt something in there that did not want me to come inside." Gerald and Corrine saw only the price and the square footage and the land. They were living in a rented double-wide at the time, and Corrine had grown up in a house not so different from the one on Coulter Road. They made an offer the same day they toured the property. It was accepted within 48 hours. They closed on October 30th, 2017. They moved in on November 4th. The first week, by Corrine's own account, was uneventful. The house needed work, cosmetic things mostly, peeling wallpaper and warped floorboards in the upstairs hallway and a kitchen faucet that groaned like a living thing when you turned it on. Gerald started tackling projects on his days off. The kids picked their bedrooms. Ellie took the larger room at the front of the second floor, the one with 2 windows overlooking the dirt road. Thomas took the smaller room next to it. Gerald and Corrine's bedroom was at the far end of the hall above the kitchen. There was a 4th room upstairs, a narrow room at the back of the house, directly across from the bathroom. It had no windows. Corrine said she intended to use it for storage, but from the very first day, she noticed that neither of the children would go near it. She did not think much of this at the time. Children are strange about spaces, but she noted it. It was Thomas who first said something. On the evening of November 11th, exactly 1 week after they moved in, Thomas came downstairs during dinner preparation and told his mother that there was a woman standing in the hallway outside his bedroom. Corrine asked him to describe the woman. Thomas said she was tall and thin, and that her dress was old-fashioned and dark, and that she was not looking at him but was looking at the door of the windowless room. Corrine went upstairs. There was no one there. She checked every room. She checked the closets. She looked under the beds. She came back downstairs and told Thomas that he had probably seen a shadow or maybe the way the light from the hallway bulb hit the wallpaper, which had a faded floral pattern that could, she supposed, look like a figure if you caught it from the right angle. Thomas did not argue. He simply went back to his dinner. But Corrine told a friend later that when she had been standing in that upstairs hallway checking the rooms, she had felt a draft so cold it made her teeth ache, and it was coming from under the door of the windowless room. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas mentioned the woman 3 more times. Each time he described her the same way, tall, thin, dark dress, standing in the hallway, always looking at that door. On the 3rd occasion, he added a new detail. He said the woman's hands were wrong. When Corrine asked what he meant, Thomas said her fingers were too long and they were bent backward like they were broken. Corrine felt a chill when he said this, not because she believed him necessarily, but because of the specificity. A 7-year-old boy inventing a ghost might say the ghost was scary or had red eyes or floated above the ground, the kinds of details children absorb from cartoons and movies. but fingers bent backward. That was not a detail Thomas would have picked up from Scooby-Doo. Gerald was dismissive. He told Corrine that the boy had an overactive imagination and that the new house, the new environment, the creaking sounds of an old structure settling in cold weather, all of it was feeding into a fantasy that would pass once Thomas adjusted. Gerald was not an unkind man, but he was practical to a fault, and he did not have patience for what he considered nonsense. He told Thomas, firmly but not cruelly, that there was no woman in the hallway and that he needed to stop scaring his mother with stories. Thomas stopped talking about the woman after that, but Corrine noticed that he also stopped sleeping through the night. She would find him at 2, 3 in the morning, awake in his bed, blankets pulled to his chin, eyes open and fixed on his bedroom door, which he now insisted be kept closed and, if possible, locked. His door did not have a lock, so Gerald installed a simple hook-and-eye latch on the inside. It seemed to help. Thomas began sleeping again, though he never slept with the door open, not once, for the remainder of the time they lived in that house. Ellie's experience began differently. She did not see anything, not at first. What she noticed was sound. In her bedroom, late at night, she began hearing what she described as scratching. It was faint, rhythmic, and it came from inside the wall that her bedroom shared with the windowless room. She first mentioned it to her mother on November 25th. She said it sounded like fingernails dragging slowly down the inside of the wall, starting near the ceiling and moving down toward the floor, and then silence, and then it would start again at the top. Over and over. Corrine investigated. She put her ear to the wall. She heard nothing. She told Ellie it was probably mice. Old houses attracted mice, especially as the weather turned cold. She told Gerald, and Gerald said he would set traps. He put glue traps in the attic crawl space and in the walls where he could access them through a small panel in the hallway. The traps caught nothing, not a single mouse, not a single insect. They sat there clean and undisturbed, but Ellie kept hearing the scratching. By early December, Corrine began to feel it too, that sense Patricia Voss had described, the sense that something in the house did not want them there. It was not a dramatic feeling. It was not the stuff of horror movies. It was quieter than that, and in many ways worse. It was the feeling of being watched when you walked down the hallway. It was the feeling that a room you had just left was not empty after you closed the door. It was the way the temperature dropped in specific places at specific times, always in the upstairs hallway, always near the windowless room, always after dark. It was the smell, a faint, sweet, rotting smell like fruit left too long in a bowl that would appear and vanish without explanation. Corrine began keeping a journal. She did not tell Gerald. She wrote down dates and times and descriptions of what she experienced. She was not a superstitious woman. She had no history of mental illness. She was trying, in her own way, to be empirical about something that defied empiricism. On December 9th, something happened that Corrine could not explain away. She was alone in the house. Gerald was on a hall. The kids were at school. She was doing laundry in the basement, which was accessed through a door in the kitchen. The basement was unfinished, concrete floor, stone walls, a single bare bulb hanging from a pull chain. The root cellar was down there, behind a heavy wooden door that was swollen in its frame and difficult to open. Corrine had never opened it. She had no reason to. She was loading the washing machine when she heard, from behind the root cellar door, a sound that she described in her journal as a child crying, muffled, as though the child's mouth were covered. She stood perfectly still. The sound continued for approximately 30 seconds and then stopped. Corrine did not approach the door. She left the basement. She left the house. She sat in her car in the driveway for 45 minutes until the school bus brought the children home. She did not go back into the basement alone for the rest of the month. She told Gerald about it that night over the phone. Gerald told her it was the pipes. Old plumbing could make sounds that resembled human voices, he said, especially in cold weather when metal contracted. He said he would look at the pipes when he got home. He did look at them. He found nothing wrong, but he also stood in the basement for 20 minutes and heard nothing unusual, and this, for Gerald, was the end of the discussion. Christmas came. The family decorated the house. They put a tree in the living room. They hung stockings. For a brief period, the house felt almost normal. Corrine noted in her journal that the activity, if that is what it was, seemed to diminish over the holiday. Thomas slept through the night. Ellie did not mention the scratching. The cold spots in the hallway seemed less pronounced. Corrine allowed herself to believe that whatever had been happening was over, that perhaps the house had simply needed to adjust to their presence the way they had needed to adjust to it. She was wrong. On January 3rd, 2018, Gerald was home between halls. He was in the upstairs hallway, replacing a section of baseboard that had come loose, when he decided, for no particular reason he could later articulate, to open the door to the windowless room. He had been in it before, briefly, during the initial move-in, but had not entered it since. The room was being used to store boxes they had not yet unpacked. Gerald opened the door and stepped inside. The room was small, perhaps 8 feet by 10 feet. The walls were covered in the same faded floral wallpaper as the rest of the upstairs. The ceiling was lower than in the other rooms, noticeably so, as though the room had been an afterthought, squeezed into the architecture where it did not quite belong. Gerald moved a few boxes, looking for a specific tool he thought might be in one of them. As he shifted a box near the back wall, he noticed that a section of wallpaper was peeling away, and behind it the wall was not plaster, it was wood. Old wood dark with age, and it had marks on it. Gerald pulled more of the wallpaper away. The marks were scratches, hundreds of them. They covered the wooden surface from about 3 feet off the ground to just above Gerald's head height. Some were shallow, barely visible. Others were deep, gouged into the wood with what must have been considerable force. And some of them, Gerald realized with a sickness rising in his stomach, were grouped in sets of 5. 5 parallel lines dragged downward, fingernails, human fingernails. Gerald did not tell Corrine what he found. Not immediately. He went to the county record's office the following day and began researching the history of the property at 14 Coulter Road. What he found was incomplete, as county records in that part of West Virginia often are, but what was there was enough to make him understand that the house had a history that went far beyond a previous owner dying in it. The house had been built in 1931 by a man named Harlan Grieve. Harlan and his wife, Dorothea, had lived there with their 3 children. In 1943, Dorothea Grieve was committed to the Weston State Hospital, which was then known as the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, for what the records described as hysteria and violent delusions. She died there in 1951. Harlan Grieve continued to live in the house until his death in 1967. The property passed through several owners after that, none of whom stayed longer than a few years. In 1979, a family named Prout lived there for 14 months before leaving abruptly. The Prouts could not be located for comment, but a neighbor who had known them told a journalist in 2019 that the Prouts' youngest daughter had stopped speaking entirely during the time they lived in the house, and that she did not speak again until several months after they moved away. In 1988, a man named Dale Scoggins purchased the property and lived there alone for nearly 20 years. Dale Scoggins was the previous owner who had died in the house. He was found in the upstairs hallway in February of 2007 by a mail carrier who had noticed that mail was accumulating in the box. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. He was 63 years old. The coroner's report noted, almost as an aside, that Scoggins' fingernails on both hands were broken down to the quick, and that there was wood fiber embedded beneath what remained of them. Gerald did not share this information with Corrine. He told himself it was because he did not want to frighten her. In truth, he was frightened himself, and Gerald Maddox was not a man who frightened easily. He was beginning to understand that his son had not been imagining the woman in the hallway. He was beginning to understand that his daughter had not been hearing mice. And he was beginning to understand that the house on Coulter Road was not merely old and creaky and in need of repair. There was something in it, something that had been there for a very long time. Something that lived in the walls or behind the walls or in the spaces between spaces, in the windowless room, in the root cellar, in the dark. On January 14th, Corrine woke at 3:17 in the morning. She knew the time because she looked at the clock on the nightstand, and the numbers burned into her memory the way certain details do when the mind is in a state of terror. Gerald was asleep beside her. The house was silent, but Corrine was awake because she had heard something, and even in the confused fog of waking, she knew what it was. It was the sound of a door opening. Slowly, the long, low creak of old hinges. And it was coming from the hallway directly outside their bedroom. Corrine lay still. She listened. She heard footsteps. They were not heavy footsteps. They were soft, careful, measured, the footsteps of someone trying not to be heard. They moved down the hallway away from the master bedroom toward the children's rooms. Corrine got out of bed. She did not wake Gerald. Later, she could not explain why. She simply got up and went to the door and opened it and looked into the hallway. The hallway was dark. The light they kept on at night, a small plug-in nightlight near the bathroom, was off. Corrine could see the outlines of the doors, the children's doors, both closed. At the far end of the hallway, near the door to the windowless room, she saw something. It was a figure. It was tall and thin, and it was standing with its back to her, facing the door of the windowless room, exactly as Thomas had described. Corrine could not move. She tried to speak and could not. She stood in the doorway of her bedroom and watched the figure, and the figure did not move, did not turn, did not acknowledge her in any way. It simply stood there facing that door, and Corrine could see even in the darkness that its arms were at its sides and that its hands were wrong, the fingers too long, bent at angles that no living hand could achieve. She stood there for what felt like hours but was probably less than a minute, and then the figure was gone. It did not walk away. It did not fade, it was simply there and then it was not. Corrine closed the bedroom door. She got back into bed. She did not sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, she told Gerald everything. She showed him the journal. She told him about the crying in the basement, about the cold spots, about what she had seen in the hallway. Gerald listened. And then, for the first time, he told her what he had found behind the wallpaper in the windowless room, the scratches, the fingernail marks. He told her about the county records, about Dorothea Grieve, about the Prout's daughter who stopped speaking, about Dale Scoggins and his broken fingernails. They sat at the kitchen table and looked at each other, and Corrine said, "We have to leave." And Gerald said, "We just bought this house. We put everything into it. Where are we going to go?" And this is the part of the story that is hardest to hear, because they did not leave, not then. They stayed because they could not afford to go. They had no savings left. They had no family to take them in. They had a mortgage on a house that was worth less than what they owed. They were trapped, and whatever was in that house with them knew it. February brought escalation. Biscuit, the dog, who had been anxious since they moved in but otherwise healthy, began refusing to go upstairs. He would stand at the bottom of the staircase and whine, and no amount of coaxing could make him climb those steps. Then he began refusing to go inside the house at all. Gerald built him a shelter in the garage, insulated and heated with a space heater, and the dog slept out there. The children noticed. Thomas asked why Biscuit would not come inside anymore. Gerald said the dog preferred the garage. Thomas looked at his father with an expression that Gerald later described to a friend as the look of a child who knows he is being lied to and is too tired to argue about it. Ellie began having nightmares. She would wake screaming, drenched in sweat, unable to describe what she had seen in the dream except to say that someone was in the walls, someone was scratching to get out, and that person had been in the walls for a very long time and was very angry. On 2 occasions, Corrine found scratch marks on the inside of Ellie's bedroom door in the morning, thin parallel lines in the wood that had not been there the night before. Ellie had no marks on her hands. Her fingernails were intact. Corrine photographed the scratches. Those photographs still exist. They were shared with the journalist who covered the story in 2019. They show exactly what Corrine described: 5 thin lines dragged downward through the wood finish on the inside of a closed door. Thomas stopped sleeping again. He began wetting the bed, something he had not done since he was 4. He became withdrawn at school. His teacher called Corrine to express concern. Corrine did not know what to say. What could she say? "My son is not sleeping because there is a dead woman in our hallway at night." She told the teacher that the adjustment to the new house had been harder than expected and that they were working on it. On February 19th, Corrine was cleaning the upstairs bathroom when she heard a sound from the windowless room. The door was closed. It was always closed. Gerald had screwed it shut after finding the scratches, 3 long screws through the door frame that made it impossible to open without a drill. The sound Corrine heard was knocking, 3 slow, deliberate knocks from inside the room. She dropped the cleaning supplies and backed into the hallway. The knocking came again. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 knocks. A pause. 3 knocks. It continued for nearly 5 minutes. Corrine stood in the hallway, shaking, counting the sets. 14 sets of 3, 42 knocks, then silence. She called Gerald, who was on a haul in Pennsylvania. She was crying. Gerald told her to take the kids and go to the feed store, go anywhere, just get out of the house, and he would be home by morning. Corrine did exactly that. She pulled the children out of their rooms, put them in the car, and drove to a diner in town where she sat with them in a booth until midnight, buying coffee she did not drink and letting the kids eat pie. And when Thomas asked her why they were at the diner on a school night, she said, "Because sometimes it's nice to have pie," and her voice only broke a little. Gerald came home the next morning and went directly upstairs. He took a drill and removed the screws from the windowless room's door frame. He opened the door. The boxes inside were undisturbed. The walls were as he had left them, the wallpaper peeled back, the scratches visible in the old wood, but there was something new. On the floor in the center of the room there was a stain. It was dark, nearly black, roughly circular, about 2 feet in diameter. It had not been there before. Gerald touched it. It was dry, it was cold. It smelled sweet, that same rotting fruit smell Corrine had noted in her journal. He cleaned it with bleach. It came back the next day in exactly the same spot, exactly the same size. He cleaned it again. It came back again. He stopped cleaning it. What happened on the night of March 7th, 2018, is the reason this story exists. It is the reason Patricia Voss stopped selling the property. It is the reason the house at 14 Coulter Road sits empty to this day, unsold, unlisted, slowly rotting back into the West Virginia hills. Gerald was home. The whole family was in the house. It was a Wednesday night, cold below freezing. The children were in bed. Gerald and Corrine were downstairs in the living room. At approximately 11:40 p.m., every light in the house went out simultaneously. Not a power outage because the refrigerator was still running and the clock on the microwave was still lit. Every light simply turned off as though every switch in the house had been flipped at once. Gerald stood up. Before he could take a step, he heard his daughter scream. Not a nightmare scream. A scream of absolute primal terror, the kind of scream that rewires a parent's nervous system and turns thought into pure motion. Gerald and Corrine ran upstairs. The hallway was pitch black and freezing cold, so cold that Corrine said she could see her breath even in the darkness. The smell was overwhelming, that sweet rot, so thick it was almost physical. Ellie was screaming continuously. Thomas was silent, which was somehow worse. Gerald reached Ellie's door and threw it open. Ellie was on her bed, pressed against the headboard, staring at the wall that her room shared with the windowless room. Gerald turned on his phone's flashlight and aimed it at the wall. The wallpaper was moving. It was bulging outward, as though something behind it was pressing against it from the other side. Something with hands, something with long, broken fingers pushing outward, stretching the paper, trying to come through. Gerald watched a handprint form in the wallpaper. 5 elongated fingers pressed outward from inside the wall, and then another, higher up, and then another, and the paper began to tear. A thin split running down from the ceiling, and behind it there was darkness, not the darkness of a wall cavity, not the darkness of space between studs, but a darkness that moved and breathed and watched. Gerald grabbed Ellie. Corrine grabbed Thomas from his room. The boy was sitting up in bed, eyes open, perfectly still, and when Corrine picked him up, he whispered, "She's coming out." They ran downstairs. They ran out the front door. They put the children in the car. Gerald went back for the dog. When he opened the garage, Biscuit was in the corner of his shelter, shaking so violently that Gerald had to carry him. They drove away from 14 Coulter Road at 11:58 p.m. on March 7th, 2018. They did not go back. They stayed with a coworker of Corrine's for 3 weeks. Then they found a rental apartment 2 towns over. Gerald went back to the house once during daylight with 2 friends to retrieve clothes and essential belongings. He said the house was quiet. He said it felt empty, genuinely empty for the first time. He said the door to the windowless room, which he had left open when they fled, was closed. The screws were back in the door frame. He had not put them there. No one had been in the house. He did not open the door. He took what he needed and left and never returned. The Maddox family defaulted on their mortgage. The bank took possession of the property in late 2018. Patricia Voss was asked to list it again. She refused. The property has had 2 other agents attempt to sell it since then. Neither succeeded. The last agent, a man named Rick Howell, listed it for 6 weeks in 2021 before pulling the listing. When asked why, he said only, "Some houses don't want to be sold." When pressed, he said, "I went out there to take photographs for the listing, interior photos. I took 37 pictures. When I got back to my office and loaded them onto my computer, 36 of them were normal. The 37th was taken in the upstairs hallway. I don't remember taking it. The hallway was empty when I was there. But in the photograph at the far end in front of that door, the one with no windows, there is a woman. She is tall. She is thin. And she is looking directly at the camera." Howell deleted the photograph. He said he wished he could delete it from his memory as well. Corrine Maddox still has her journal. She has been approached multiple times by paranormal investigators, documentary producers, and podcasters who want access to it. She has refused every request. In her only public statement given to the journalist in 2019, she said, "I don't want to talk about what happened in that house. I don't want to think about it. I don't want anyone going in there and stirring things up and making it worse. That thing in there, whatever it is, it feeds on attention. It feeds on fear. The best thing anyone can do is leave it alone. Board up the doors and the windows and let the woods take it back. Let it rot. Let it disappear. Because whatever is in that house has been there since before the walls were built, and it will be there long after the walls come down, and it is not a ghost, and it is not a memory, and it is not something that can be explained or understood or cast out. It is something else. It is something that waits. And the worst thing about it, the thing I will carry with me until I die, is that I do not think it was trying to hurt us. I think it was trying to show us something. I think it wanted us to open that door. I think it has always wanted someone to open that door. And I thank God every single day that we never did. The house at 14 Coulter Road still stands. The windows are dark. The porch has begun to sag. The barn behind it has collapsed entirely, a heap of gray wood slowly sinking into the earth. The forest has crept closer, vines climbing the siding, saplings pushing up through the gravel driveway. No one lives there. No one visits. The county has discussed demolition but has never allocated the funds. The neighbors, those few who live within a mile of the property, avoid it. One of them, an elderly man named Walt Jennings, who has lived on Coulter Road for over 50 years, was asked if he had ever experienced anything unusual near the Grieve house. He said, "I don't go near that house. Nobody goes near that house. My daddy told me when I was a boy. He said stay away from that place, and I asked him why. And he said because the woman in there is still looking for her children. And if she sees you, she might mistake you for one of them, and then she will never let you leave." Nobody has been able to confirm what happened to Dorothea Grieve's children after she was committed to the asylum in 1943. Harlan Grieve lived alone in the house for 24 years after his wife was taken away. The county has no record of the children attending school after 1943. There are no death certificates. There are no burial records. There are no records of them at all. 3 children, 2 girls and a boy between the ages of 5 and 11, simply vanished from the public record as though they had never existed. And in the windowless room at the back of the second floor of the house at 14 Coulter Road, behind the wallpaper, carved into the old dark wood, there are scratches. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, grouped in sets of 5, starting near the ceiling and dragging downward. And if you look closely, if you look more closely than you should, you can see that they were not made by one set of hands. They were made by many, small hands, children's hands, scratching at the inside of a door that someone sealed shut a very long time ago. The Maddox family is alive. They live in a different state now. The children are older. Thomas speaks again, fully normally, though he will not talk about the house. Ellie is in high school. She does well. She has friends. She sleeps with the light on. Corrine still keeps her journal, though she no longer writes in it. She keeps it as proof, she says, proof that it happened, proof that she is not crazy, proof that there are places in this world where the walls are thin and something waits on the other side, patient and hungry and eternal. Gerald Maddox does not talk about Black Hollow at all. He does not talk about the house or the room or the woman in the hallway. But his coworkers have noticed that he will not enter a room without windows. He will not sleep in darkness. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the roads are empty and he is driving his truck through some stretch of rural highway with nothing but trees on either side, he swears he can hear it. Faint, rhythmic, coming from somewhere he cannot see. The sound of fingernails on wood, scratching, always scratching, trying to get out. If you know where Coulter Road is, do not go there. If you find the house, do not go inside. And if you go inside, if you climb the stairs and walk down that hallway and you see that door, the one with no windows, the one with the screws in the frame, the one that is always closed, do not open it. Do not knock on it. Do not press your ear against it and listen. Because if you listen closely enough, you will hear something on the other side. And once it knows you are listening, it will never stop knocking back. This has been behind closed doors. The house at 14 Coulter Road is real. The Maddox family is real. What happened inside those walls is, according to every person involved, exactly as described. There is no explanation. There is no resolution. There is only a house in the woods and a door that should not be opened and a woman who stands in the hallway at night, waiting with her long and broken fingers for someone to finally let her in. Or to let something out. Sleep well,